Hello everyone, welcome back to Planet Linux, where today we have part 2 of our Windows versus Linux Mint comparison. Before we get into it, if you haven't already, I recommend that you take a look at part 1, where we compare the installation process of Windows and Linux Mint, as well as each of their initial setup in order to get your computer ready for use. In today's video, it's all about software and productivity. We'll be taking a look at the built-in applications for each operating system, as well as the different ways you can install additional software. We'll then take a look at a few different productivity scenarios and the software that you can use to complete daily tasks such as writing documents, browsing the internet, setting up printers, managing photos, and more. Just before we dive in, if you haven't already, I'd recommend subscribing to the channel and marking the notification bell, as well as following me on Twitter at PlanetLinux98 to stay up to date as each video in this series is released. We'll start today's video by taking a look at the built-in applications of both systems. We'll start with Windows 11 here, and then take a look at Linux Mint. Alright, so here we are on our Windows desktop. And we'll start by taking a look at some of the default applications that come included with Windows. There's plenty of programs here that you may wish to use on a daily basis, such as a lot of accessories, including a calculator and calendar, as well as a webcam viewer. You've got your File Explorer, some help utilities, the Groove Music Player. We've got a mail program that we'll take a look at in a moment. We've got our default web browser being Microsoft Edge. We've got the Microsoft Store that we'll take a look at in a couple moments. This is one option for getting additional software. We have Microsoft Teams being a video call utility, as well as To-Do, which is a to-do list manager. We have Notepad for writing text documents. We have a link to the Microsoft Office suite that allows you to download the various Office programs and purchase a license for that if you don't have one. This comes included with OneDrive for cloud storage. Again, there's a small amount of free storage there, but you can also purchase a OneDrive plan. We have the Paint application, which we'll also take a quick look at in a little while, as well as a Photos app for managing your photos. We have our Settings utility, a snipping tool for taking screenshots, a Solitaire collection for some solitaire games, a Sticky Notes application for pinning notes to your desktop, Tips for little tips about Windows 11, a voice recording utility, a weather application, the Windows terminal to access your command line. We have the Xbox app for you gamers, that'll come up in our gaming part of the series. And we have Your Phone, which allows you to connect your Android phone up to your computer and receive notifications. We'll take a look at a few of these apps in more detail in a moment, but all in all, there's a decent collection here to get you started using your computer. If we switch over to Linux Mint, it's a similar story here, however there are a few differences. Under our accessories, we have a lot of similar ones here, such as a calculator, as well as a document viewer, our file manager, an image viewer, notes, which again allows us to take and manage notes. We have our screenshot utility, which is like sticky notes in Windows. We have our text editor, much like Notepad. And we have Warpinator, which allows you to transfer files between different Linux computers as well as Android phones. I've made a video on this application in the past. I recommend you go check it out if you're interested. Under graphics, we have a tool to scan documents into PDFs. We have a drawing application and the Pix image viewer and editor. For Internet, in Linux Mint, the default web browser is Firefox. We have Thunderbird for email, which we'll take a look at in a minute. And we have a web apps utility that allows you to turn any website into its own standalone application. For Office, Linux Mint comes included with the LibreOffice suite, free of charge. We'll take a look at this as well as compare it to Microsoft Office later in this video. We have Celluloid, which is a video player. We have Hypnotics, which is a live TV streaming app. And we have Rhythmbox for playing and managing a music collection. A couple things that weren't included in that list are also the software manager for installing additional software. It's much like the Windows Store, as well as our terminal for accessing the command line. And speaking of the software manager, next I want to take a look at the various ways you can install additional software in both Linux Mint and in Windows. In Linux Mint, the first place you'll want to go to look for new software is the software manager. This is essentially an app store or software center where you can find the majority of applications available for Linux. While not every piece of software is available in here, the majority of major ones are, so it's definitely the best place to start when looking for new software. If you know the name of the piece of software you're looking for, you can simply search for it here, such as if we're looking for Steam or Spotify. Or if you'd like to browse, you can see some of their selected favorites here, or pick the category that you wish to search through. For example, under Sound and Video, we have media players such as VLC, as well as audio editors such as Audacity, and various other programs in here. When you find an application you want to install, you can click on it to view more information, as well as some screenshots and reviews, and you can click the Install button. If prompted, enter your password. And once the application is installed, you can either launch it from here or from within the application's menu. There's also a convenient button to uninstall it. Now, while the software manager should have the majority of software that you're looking for, and is the first place that you should look, if the software you're looking to install isn't in the software manager, then it's possible that the creator intends for you to download the software from the internet. Now, this could go a couple of different ways. The software could be hosted in a personal package archive, or PPA, which is essentially an additional repository or collection of software that you're adding into the software manager. In this case, if you search online for the software, you may come across the ability to add the developer's PPA to your software manager. This might either be done through a link or by giving you the name of the personal package archive. If you're given the name of the archive, you can open up the Software Sources application, go to PPAs, and add it. Once you've added the archive, you'll be asked to update the software catalog, and then the software should appear in the software manager. Alternatively, if you're browsing the internet for software, Linux Mint can install package files that use the .deb format. Think of these .deb files much like .exe files in Windows. For example, here we have a download button for this Surfshark VPN application for Linux. And when we select to download, we see that we're downloading a .deb file. In this case, we can have it open in the package installer, and this will run much like a Windows setup. Once it's downloaded, it will open the installer here with information about the program and an install button. We will enter our password, and now it will install the package for us. It is worth noting that these packages are inherently slightly less secure than packages that are found in the software manager, as these are coming from a third party that can't necessarily be verified. However, they do work as a last resort if you can't find the software you're looking for in the software manager. As a real quick side note here, if you're ever looking online for how to install a piece of software, and you're asked to enter a command into the terminal that looks much like this says sudo apt install and then the package name, this is the command line backend for the application installer that the software manager uses. So if this is the case, it's a good idea to go into the software manager first and make sure that the package isn't in there. Alternatively, if you have a command that says to add a repository like this, then you can always copy the name of this repository into an added PPA that we mentioned earlier. Now we'll take a look at the ways we can install software in Windows 11. And in many ways, it's fairly similar to Linux Mint. However, we'll notice that the balance is a bit different. For example, Windows 11 does have the Microsoft Store, and this works much the same way as a central place where we can install software from. However, it's worth noting that, especially historically, the Microsoft Store has been known for not including many major pieces of software and instead being filled with a lot of unofficial junk. However, there are certainly some notable pieces of software in here, so if you'd like, it is worth going in here to at least take a look first. For example, we can search for and install Spotify from here. However, something like Steam is not in here, so it's worth taking a look in the Microsoft Store if you want to, but chances are you probably won't find the software you're looking for in here unless it's very common. Which leads us to the second and most likely way that you'll be installing software here in Windows, which is by searching over the internet. In this case, you'll be looking for an application that is in a .exe format. This stands for executable. And this is an interesting glitch. I have the Welcome to Microsoft Edge screen over top of the window here, and I can't really read any of this. Well, this is something. Okay. So in this case, we'll look online to install Steam. And we'll notice that when we go to install it here, it downloads a .exe file. So we can open our downloaded file, and it will run the installer for it. So while the ways of installing software are similar between Linux and Windows, it really comes down to the likelihood of which method you're using. In Windows here, you're not going to find the majority of your software in the Microsoft Store, and there are potential privacy implications around using this as well, with regards to what data Microsoft is collecting when you install from here. And many users will end up having to go online to look for the majority of software that you want to install. However, on Linux Mint, it's much more likely the software you're looking for is in the software manager, and there isn't any sort of data or usage statistic collection with the Linux Mint software manager, so you can install from there without having to worry about that. The likelihood of having to go online to find a piece of software in Linux Mint is still there, however, you're much less likely to need to do that. Alright, so now we'll take a look at some common productivity tasks that you use your computer for on a daily basis and compare them between Windows and Linux. First off, as more and more of our digital lives are being done online and we're constantly linking online accounts, that seems like a decent place to start on the process to sync online accounts into your operating system. In Windows, this is fairly easy. We can open up Settings and go into Accounts and then Email and Accounts. And from here, we can add additional third-party accounts for services like Gmail, Microsoft Outlook, and many other email and calendar providers, if this will ever open here. There we go. And this information will sync with email, contacts, and calendars across our system. This can be done similarly in Linux Mint, either by searching for it in the menu or going into Settings. We're looking for Online Accounts. And again here we have options to add a Google account, Microsoft, Nextcloud, which is a privately hosted cloud service you can set up, as well as a few others here. And again, this can sync with all sorts of different services, including email and calendars and your contacts. A quick note about email. By default, Linux Mint uses Thunderbird, which is very capable, however it's not necessarily the best looking. It looks a bit old-fashioned compared to some more modern apps like in Windows, some more modern email apps. For example, here's a picture of a Thunderbird interface compared to the built-in Windows Mail interface. So if you're not a huge fan of the look of Thunderbird, an email application that I recommend for Linux Mint is called Geary. It looks a whole lot nicer, it's very modern and sleek, so I do recommend giving this a try if you're not a fan of Thunderbird and are just looking for a good desktop email client, a lot like Windows Mail. Next up, I want to talk all about Office suites, the software that includes the applications we use for writing documents and spreadsheets and presentations. And in Windows 10, it comes with a shortcut to Office Online. This is a web version of Microsoft Office that you can use for free, and it does give you the basic functionalities of Word, Excel, and PowerPoint for documents, spreadsheets, and presentations. However, the functionality of this is pretty limited, and there are a lot of features missing that you would find in the full Microsoft Office suite. So many users would opt to purchase Microsoft Office instead. However, if we take a look at Linux Mint, it comes included out of the box with LibreOffice, which is a free Office suite that aims to provide all the functionality of Microsoft Office and compatibility with Microsoft Office documents. For example, here's a slide I worked on for my last video that opens up just fine. This can be saved as either an open document format or as a Microsoft PowerPoint file. Compatibility isn't always guaranteed 100%, but it's usually good enough that you'll have no problem creating as well as viewing existing Microsoft Office documents here in LibreOffice. And it's also worth noting that LibreOffice is available for Windows. So if you're looking for a free Office suite for Windows, I do recommend giving this a try. There are numerous other Office suites available that are free for both Windows and Linux, but that really deserves a separate video in and of itself comparing all of those. Just note that out of the box, Linux Mint does come with LibreOffice, a free Office suite that provides everything you should need. Of course, these days, many people have started using online platforms such as Google Drive to manage all of their documents. And in that case, being a website utility, this works perfectly fine in either Linux or Windows. And if you add your Google account in through online accounts, there's often some integration that you can get there within your file manager to manage your Google Drive files. So regardless of which platform you're using, Windows or Linux, services like Google Drive and Dropbox will work perfectly fine. Now, if you use your computer for any sort of documents, then there's a good chance that at some point you'll have to print those documents. And setting up a printer in both systems is actually quite easy. I feel like there are a lot of misconceptions on both platforms about how difficult printers can be. In Windows, it's often inferred that you need to download printer and manufacturer specific applications in order to get all the proper drivers and get your printer up and running. While in Linux, there's often the misconception that it's either really complicated to set up your printer or it just won't work. However, I want to debunk this fact by showing just how easy it is to set up most printers in both systems. Now here in Linux Mint, if you plug in a USB printer, it will likely just work out of the box without having to add anything. However, if you're working with a network or wireless printer, then we will have to add it, and this is really easy to do. We can either go into our system settings and click on printers, or just search for printers here in the main menu. From here we can click to add our printer, and then click on network printer, and then find network printer. Now, as I'm running this in a virtual machine, it's not linked into my local network, so it won't find any printers here, but your printer should just show up in the list here, which you could select, and then click forward. It will ask you to confirm the model of the printer and give it a name, and from that point it will just add it. And here in Windows 11 it's a fairly similar story. Again, we can go into settings or search for printers to add one. And if it doesn't show up in the list here, then we'll click to add a printer and it will search for it. Again, being in a virtual machine that's disconnected from my network, it's not going to find it here, but any network printers you have should show up in the list here where you could click and then add it. Next, when it comes to productivity, there's always so much going on in our lives that it's important to be able to manage notifications on our system. Now, both platforms offer methods for receiving notifications as well as managing how and when they come in. In Windows, you can access your notifications by clicking on the date and time here. And I've personally noticed it seems that Windows likes to really stack up a lot of notifications here about different things, some of which seem somewhat trivial or unnecessary, but here you can view all of your notifications and clear them as you deem necessary. And for those times that you don't want to be disturbed while you're working on something, you can go into the quick settings here and enable focus mode. This by default will stop all incoming notifications for a period of time. And if we go into our notification center here, you see we have focus mode settings that allows us to adjust what exactly turning on focus mode does. For example, here it's set to only allow priority notifications. We can customize exactly what those are. And we have some additional settings here, such as enabling focus mode automatically in certain instances. Now, Linux Mint handles notifications slightly differently. By default, incoming notifications will appear in the top corner of the screen. However, you can set this to be at the bottom right if that's what you prefer. And they'll often be temporary, just showing for a few seconds before going away. When there are pending notifications, there will be a small notification bell icon down here that you can click to view them. However, more often than not, Linux Mint doesn't tend to have that many notifications come in. Instead, you'll often just have some of these status indicators down here, for example, when there are updates available. So in general, I found Linux Mint doesn't stack up as many notifications as Windows does. That may also be the reason why Linux Mint doesn't really have a focus or do not disturb mode. If we take a look under our notification settings here, it's fairly bare bones, basically being whether we do or do not want notifications to be enabled, how long we want them to stay on the screen for, and where they're located. So while there isn't a do not disturb mode here, it's also not quite as necessary as you don't tend to get a lot of random notifications popping up. That said, if you ever have third-party applications that love to send a lot of notifications, it would be nice to have a bit more fine-tuned control over exactly which notifications you see and which ones you don't. And this is something I hope Linux Mint can improve on in the future. Now, when it comes to managing files on your system, it's a rather similar process in both cases. The file manager for both systems look pretty similar here, both having your favorite or most frequently used places here on the left, as well as showing any connected devices or network drives that you may have connected. Of course, you can browse all of your folders here as you see fit, and copying and pasting files is the same on both systems. Here in Windows 11, it's a very similar experience. However, one thing I will mention while we're here is the process of viewing and editing photos. If you open a photo in Linux Mint, it displays in a fairly simple photo viewer. However, we can choose to open this instead with Pix, which on the surface is another photo viewer. But this actually offers us some fairly significant edit controls, such as adjusting the colors and the white balance and brightness, cropping the photo, and rotating, among various other things. So this offers some fairly capable editing features directly out of the box without having to install any third-party software. If we open up a photo in Windows, it'll ask us what we want to open it in. The default Photos application is, once again, primarily a photo viewer. However, this does have a few nice editing controls as well. On the surface here, we have common things like rotating, but we can also click to edit this image and see a few more advanced controls. So again, this is a nice feature to have out of the box, and I do like that the edit controls are a built-in part of the default photo viewer, whereas in Linux Mint, by default, it opened up in just a photo viewer, and we had to make a point to open it in Pix instead. That said, we can easily set the Pix photo viewer and editor as the default. If we go into our system settings and click on default applications, then for photos we could switch this from image viewer to Pix. And now whenever we open an image, it will open it in Pix, which will not only let us view it, but also edit it all in this one application. And that just about wraps up what I want to cover in this video. As we take a quick recap here, looking at which system excelled at what. First off, there's a few things that both Linux Mint and Windows did well. Specifically, it was fairly easy to add a printer in both instances. They both have similarly simple file management, and they both had some nice built-in tools for some quick photo editing. However, there were definitely some differences. For example, Linux Mint really came through with the fact that most of the software you use can be downloaded from the built-in software manager, and you don't have to worry about any data collection or telemetry in using that. Compare that to Windows, where most of your software isn't going to be available through the Microsoft Store, and even if it is, you have the concern of data collection or telemetry data being sent back to Microsoft when you use that. Also on the topic of data collection, adding online accounts in Linux Mint can be done more privately and securely. There's no concerns about any of that data going back to Microsoft. Also, the LibreOffice suite is included free of charge out of the box, and it has near perfect Microsoft Office file compatibility. Compare that to Windows, where you're encouraged to purchase a Microsoft Office subscription. That said, you can still download LibreOffice for Windows. On the flip side, however, Windows does do a couple things better than Linux Mint did. For example, it's much easier to customize how your notifications come in and when you want them to on Windows compared to Linux Mint. Part of this may be due to the fact that Linux Mint just doesn't seem to send as many notifications, but it's still nice to have that flexibility. Also, while both systems do include nice photo editing tools out of the box, in Windows those tools are included directly in the default photo viewer, whereas in Linux Mint it's a separate application that you would have to set as the default for opening photos in order to get that same cohesive functionality. All in all, both of these systems have a lot of strengths with a few weaknesses, and it's ultimately up to you to decide which you'd prefer using. That wraps up this part covering everything about productivity, and I look forward to the next video in this series that's all about gaming. We'll be taking a look at everything from the different game launchers and platforms that are available, such as Steam and Lutris, to game compatibility on both platforms, and of course we will be comparing the performance of various games between Windows and Linux to see what those differences are. So we have all of that to look forward to in the next video in this series. And of course after that, in part 4, we'll be taking a look at various customization and settings that we have available in both platforms, as well as each system's accessibility features. And finally, in part 5, we'll be summarizing the overall user experience of each, and I'll give my final thoughts and conclusions. So I hope that you've enjoyed this video. If you have, then I'd appreciate you giving a thumbs up, and if there's any feedback you'd like to give, feel free to post it in the comments. And to make sure that you stay up to date and get notified about the latest content, I recommend subscribing to the channel and marking the notification bell icon. Also, you can follow me on Twitter at PlanetLinux98. Thanks for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.